Hello, listeners. Been wondering how you can help the show? Probably not. But here are 5 things you can do. 1. Subscribe. Support the show by clicking the subscription link in the show notes. 2. Review on iTunes, on our website, www.afraidofnothingpodcast.com, or on whatever app you listen to. 3. Donate. When you go to our website, click the cute coffee cup icon. Or in the show notes, click the subscription link. 4. Share. Sharing really is caring. Tell your friends and even your enemies to check out the show. 5. Watch. Wait a minute, it's a podcast, not a movie. Actually, it's both. Check the show notes to find out where to watch the documentary. You can also rent it on Prime Video. That's it. Oh, one last thing. Enjoy this episode.
In a world where nothing is known, nothing is certain, reality is not real. Wake up! Be afraid of nothing. I'm Bob Heskey.
Robert.
The host with the ghost.
This is my podcast, based on my paranormal documentary, Afraid of Nothing. Each episode, we talk to people who see life and the afterlife through a different lens. Join me.
Who is this large man? And what's he doing in our bedroom?
As we lift the veil and open our minds to see beyond our eyes lie. This is Afraid of Nothing.
All right, we are here with Paul Kimball. He's a Canadian film and television producer, writer, director, whose projects include several documentary films about UFOs. His uncle was the late, great Stanton Friedman, an iconic ufologist. Welcome to the show, Paul Kimball.
Hey, thanks for having me on. Good to be here. Although I'm not really here, but I am sort of here. But good to be talking to you.
That's like the
regardless
existential question, right? Paul, you've done a lot of great stuff. A lot of your documentaries have dealt with the paranormal, including UFOs, ghosts, and cryptids. You mind telling our audience about some of your favorite ones that you've worked on over the past 15, 20 years?
Sure. I was introduced once by the head of the film funding agency here in Nova Scotia to a federal cabinet minister as the UFO filmmaker, which I thought was most amusing because I knew the guy, first of all. So he knew I did other work. So I've done documentaries about everything from pro wrestling to jazz music to classical music. I did a television series up here for Bravo about classical music for 2 years back in 2004 and 2005. But the ones that everybody seems to remember me for at least my early career, from 2000 till 2009, I did 5 films loosely about the UFO phenomenon. A biography of Stanton Friedman was my first one. Then a follow-up called Do You Believe in Magic, which was about Stan and the Majestic 12 documents. Fields of Fear, which is a documentary about a Canadian cattle mutilation investigator, the late Fern Belzil from Alberta. Did another one called Aztec 1948, where I'm at least partly responsible for resurrecting the Aztec hoax after it being dead for about 30 years. And my last one was Best Evidence Top 10 UFO Cases. I did that in 2008, I think, for Space, which is sort of Canada's equivalent to the Sci-Fi Channel. I think it's actually called Sci-Fi now in Canada. Since then, I haven't actually done anything on UFOs. I sort of moved into ghost investigating, at least in the paranormal sense after that. Did a television series for one season here in Canada called Ghost Cases in 2009, and then returned to it in 2017 with another television series called Haunted, which we just wrapped up filming our 5th season on. So I'm in post-production on the 5th season now. It's been renewed for 3 more seasons. I've left the on-air investigating behind, so I finished my time this season. I sort of wrapped my little career up and turned the directing and the on-air investigating over to others. But I'm still involved as a producer and a writer and in charge of post-production, so I'm still involved in it. So yeah, that's kind of the paranormal stuff, film-wise or documentary-wise, that I've done. And I've done 5 feature films too, all of which one way or another kind of have a bit of a paranormal or supernatural theme. Usually, though, dealing with questions of faith and belief and our relationship to God and stuff like that. But still, that's a supernatural thing. So yeah, it runs throughout my work, I guess, no matter where you look.
So you have this interest in the paranormal.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people that have been guests on my show, they're clairvoyant or they're psychic or they have some type of third eye ability, right? When I made my documentary, I had none of that. I felt like I was on the outside looking in, so I wanted to talk to a bunch of people to kind of find out what I was missing. What is it with you? Have you ever had any paranormal experiences as a child or seen a UFO, or have you just had a curiosity and you wanted to kind of solve it?
Never saw a UFO, at least not as far as I know. Never really, that I can recall, had a paranormal experience as a child. I think all kids feel different things. So I'm always pretty leery of child witnesses to begin with, not because they're inherently dishonest, but because I remember being a kid too. They have very active imaginations, and sometimes it can be tough to find out where the truth is in that. But yeah, nothing really that stands out, more an intellectual curiosity, really. Stanton Friedman was my uncle, married into my family when I was about 10, probably 9 or 10. So I grew up knowing Stan pretty well and going to some of his lectures and certainly seeing him at family reunions and all that sort of thing. And I'd have to give Stan credit, I guess, for being the one who stimulated an interest in the paranormal beyond what I think my entire generation had. So if you grew up in the 1970s like I did, you grew up with Star Wars and Star Trek and Battlestar Galactica, the old one, not the new one, and Space 1999 and Doctor Who and all that sort of stuff. So science fiction, the idea of alien life, extraterrestrial life, at least as one facet of what the other could be, is something that's embedded in our culture. It was before that, but it really took off in the late 60s in through the 70s in a popular pop culture kind of way. And then the X-Files, of course, and everything that came on after it. So the combination probably of knowing Stan since I was a child and also growing up in that pop culture milieu. But I mean, my dad was a judge for, 35 years, I guess, still alive. But I remember my dad had Eric von Daniken's books, not all of them, but a couple of them, Chariots of the Gods, I think. And I just think his generation grew up reading books about flying saucers and ancient astronauts and everything too. It didn't mean you believed in it, but it was something that was a curiosity. So that's kind of where my interest in the sort of UFO subject came from. The ghost thing is totally different. That stems back my entire life. And it relates to the one fundamental question that we all have to face as human beings. Is there, in the immortal words of Brian Ferry, more than this? And what comes after, the end of this life, at least? So that's something I've always been thinking of. My grandfather was a Reformed Baptist minister. He traveled down a different road in trying to figure out what was out there for us afterwards. He believed he had answers. I have relatives who are evangelical and very religious. I have a cousin who's a minister. They have their path. My path was to explore other areas as well as also studying theirs. So when I did my graduate studies, my research was on 18th and 19th century evangelical New Light Baptist religions in the maritime provinces of Nova Scotia. So my historical studies were related to that. Ghost hunting, at least for me, is not a big leap from studying religious trends, religious groups, religious affiliations, and religious philosophy and theories. So that's sort of where that interest came from, I suppose.
Now, if you don't mind, I don't know to speak for Stanton Friedman, but was he beyond UFOs? You ever talk to him about ghosts and cryptids? And was he a believer in that? Or was he kind of, I need proof to believe in Bigfoot and all this stuff?
Never talked to him about Bigfoot that I can recall, although he went to an awful lot of conferences in his life. So I'm sure, well, actually, I was at a conference once here in Nova Scotia, not too long, a few years ago, where Lauren Coleman was the other headline speaker. So Stan was one of them. Lauren Coleman, the famous U.S. cryptozoologist, was another. And I believe they went out for dinner. They certainly knew each other. They're friendly. I'm sure Stan did talk to him, obviously, about Bigfoot during the conversation, and probably UFOs, too. I honestly don't know what Stan's stance on all that was. I couldn't even hazard a guess, but it wasn't, I don't think it was really on his radar screen. On the question of ghosts, I know he found ghosts interesting. I think it was probably because I was involved with it, although I'm not sure. But I had long conversations over the years with Stan about religion, the idea of God. He was very interested, for instance, in integrating those kinds of concepts into UFO theories or research. So I remember when we filmed Stanton Friedman is Real in 2001, we filmed a segment. I don't think it actually made it into the film, but it was him sitting down with Barry Downing. Reverend Barry Downing was the author of one of the seminal books about UFOs, The Bible and Flying Saucers. So if you think that flying saucers or UFOs, for instance, were space aliens who came down and are basically, you can find them in the Bible, Old Testament, New Testament. Well, Barry was at the forefront of that theory. And Stan found it not only fascinating, but I remember he would lecture and he would give examples of how, particularly the Old Testament, where you could see certain things that are clearly allegorical, like Sodom and Gomorrah, where somebody was turned to salt. I can never remember who. Lot, Lot's wife. Yes, Lot's wife, I think, looked behind and was turned to a pillar of salt or something. And he would go on about how that could be UFOs. That could be aliens using advanced technology. This description reminds me of what the aftermath of a nuclear explosion would be like. This looks like a laser. They blinded their eyes. This could be a laser. So Stan was interested in that aspect of the Bible. There's no question about it. But I also thought Stan was a pretty spiritual guy and was open to a whole bunch of different ideas without ever, I think, settling in on one of them and saying, well, this is the absolute truth. But he and I certainly talked about it. He married into a family where, my particular offshoot of the family isn't terribly religious. But like I said, my grandfather was, my grandmother, many of my aunts and uncles and cousins. So Stan married into that family. He was Jewish himself, knowing full well what he was getting into. So there were always interesting conversations at the family reunions between Stan and some of my more evangelical relatives, and they always coexisted very happily. They could talk about anything from baseball to religion. We always tried to avoid politics, I guess. But yeah, he had a very spiritual bent, and I always enjoyed talking to him about those kinds of things.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Hello, everyone. I am Claudio Mergen, the host of the Spiritually Inspired podcast. 129 episodes later, I can say that the word about the podcast is spreading fast. The audio versions are available on Apple, Buzzsprout, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and all the other major audio platforms. Please check us out at www.spirituallyinspired.ca. Thank you.
Now, you have a kind of a different take on that aliens have been here. You have kind of a different take, which we talked about before we started this, and I'll paraphrase it, but maybe you could correct me. I think your hypothesis about the paranormal is that you suggest the paranormal could be an advanced non-human intelligence pulling things out of our minds and then representing it back to us in ways that we can understand. There's kind of the thought that this is why paranormal tales have changed through times, because it's presented depending on who the audience that they're serving the information up to. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that seems like a pretty good representation of what's on the Wikipedia page. I didn't even know I had a Wikipedia page until a couple of months ago. It's like, oh, well, this is interesting.
You do?
Yeah, that basically sums it up. It's also not my idea. So I would never claim to be the guy who originated it. Even within the modern paranormal world, Jacques Vallée has gone down that path, at least in some respect. My good friend, the late Mac Tonys, delved into that. My good friend, Greg Bishop, who's a writer and a radio host and a podcaster that everybody should know about now with his show Radio Mysterioso and some of his books out of Los Angeles. We had a group. I dubbed it the Paranormal Rat Pack, which in varying degrees, everybody that I said was in the Paranormal Rat Pack hated. Some more than others. But I think I said it was Mac Tonys, Greg Bishop, and Nick Redfern and I. And we were all friends. And I sort of said, yeah, we're kind of like Frank Sinatra and the Rat Pack. We're slightly outsiders, but we're really cool and hip, and we have some cool and hip ideas. And I was just the ringleader. Nick does research on everything. So Nick has literally researched everything from Bigfoot to UFOs to mind control experiments to Martians. His new book is about Martians. So I say this in the best possible way, Nick's all over the place. He's very esoteric, I guess. Mac and Greg were much more interested in UFOs in particular, but all of them were Nick and Greg are obviously still alive, open-minded thinkers. And it was Greg in particular, though, because he has a background in art, studying art. And I do too. I love art. I'm an artistic person. So he and I would do his radio show. I'd go out to LA and we'd sit in the studio and this is what we would talk about. And the idea that I think, and I don't want to misrepresent Greg, but I think he would refer to it as a paranormal art project where, again, they're taking these images, they're interacting with us. So it is an act of artistic co-creation, if you will. So whatever it is, whether it's space aliens or God or some advanced, I think I came up with the term advanced non-human intelligence. So maybe that's my contribution. But whatever it is out there and it can see how we think and how we act. It's far beyond us, but it wants to interact with us, not in a bad way. We all have different ideas about why, but I tend to think in a way to try and make us aware of our own surroundings, to make us aware of something greater than ourselves out there without forcing it down our throats. So consider it the prime directive of whatever we're dealing with. They can't directly interfere. They don't want to, but we're like children to them and they want to perhaps move us along. Or my friend Mac would say, we're like cats and they're like people with laser pointers. Mac loved this example. And so both of them co-create what is in essence a little play. If you've ever watched a guy point a laser pointer and let the cat go crazy.
Yep.
And they each get different things from it. So the guy that would point the laser pointer, in this case Mac, but I've done it. I know most of my friends who have cats have done it. You get amusement from watching the cat try and catch the laser, and you know the cat can never catch it because you know what it is. And you know that this is just something you're projecting, and this amuses you to do it. But it does no harm to the cat. In fact, if you're the cat, and while I can't think like a cat, who can? The cats never sort of go, screw you, buddy. We want nothing to do with this. This is terrible. You're a horrible, horrible torturer. The cats love it. They go crazy. They're like, trying to catch this thing because for them it's exercise, it's stimulating, and it's, I guess, in a cat sense, a mystery. And it's one that they'll never be able to solve, probably, unless they get smarter. But they can figure it out in a sense that they start to see patterns and they start to understand, if you do it enough with them, perhaps how you're going to move the light. And then, especially if you don't change it up. So if you kind of get into a lazy rhythm, the cat starts to get bored. So then you have to mix it up a bit. So, hey, maybe dragons aren't cool anymore. So whatever we're dealing with decided dragons or whatever images they might have shown us 1,000 years ago, let's try something new. These people seem to have technologically advanced. Maybe we should get some credit for that, for stimulating their imagination. Well, let's fire something that's a little more technologically advanced than they are now and see if that stimulates them. And I think if that's what happened in the 20th century, it worked. People's imaginations were stimulated by the UFO phenomenon as it started to appear in the 1940s. Not Roswell, forget about Roswell, but things stemming back to ghost rockets, but then the Kenneth Arnold sightings, and then everything that went on into the 1950s and 1960s. And there was this huge burst of imagination, fear. There was some fear in there too. Certainly that's kind of what we look at it. I think what I look at it as being, and I view it more as an artistic, like Greg, I think, I view it more as an artistic endeavor, or more like an artist would, that you're painting a canvas, whoever you're dealing with is almost co-creating that painting with you. So if you're this advanced non-human intelligence, you can do all these spooky tricks. I'm talking as a ghost investigator now. It's like if a tree falls in the forest, would anybody hear it? No. There has to be somebody in the forest to hear the tree. And if you're an advanced non-human intelligence and you want to do some of this stuff, well, if you don't have anybody to do it with, if there's no cat in the room or no Paul, what's the point? And so it takes two to tango, and we're an integral part of whatever that process is. We're just not in control of it. We're surfing the wave, and whatever we're dealing with is in control of it. And then the question becomes, what are we dealing with? My stock answer to that is I don't care. Somebody could say space aliens, somebody else could say God, somebody else could say something else, and I go, oh, look, I don't care. As long as I figure it doesn't mean us harm, I actually don't really care what it is. I'm more interested in the process and in the sort of the mystery of what they're trying to tell us or show to us or make us feel than I would ever be about what their identity is.
Well, one of my questions was going to be who it is. I was going to ask, do you think it's like AI, right? Like artificial intelligence, that maybe something a higher consciousness creates, but is this an AI thing that gets a sense of our mind, figures out what's in there, then presents something back? Is it artificial driven, or do you, again, I guess you don't have the answer to that. My other question is, do you think it affects
a select part of the human population, or is everybody being brain scanned and having stuff represented to everyone?
Well, I wouldn't phrase it so much as being brain scanned, because that sounds like, although I suppose that's kind of what we're talking about. But I don't know how it would act or how it would work. It could be based on emotions, honestly. It could be based on a whole bunch of things and the way we interact with the universe that we don't even understand. I scared the bejeebus out of my friend Tim Banal on his podcast once. I went into a deep dive talking about the idea of, and I used a Star Trek analogy where I said Odo from Deep Space Nine. He exists as a separate being, fine, or he can, but he's also part of this much broader the founders and this great link. And at the end of the series, spoiler alert for your listeners, if they haven't watched Deep Space Nine, he merges back in with his spirit. And then everything is shared in a way that we can't possibly, I don't think, really comprehend. And Tim was like, I don't want to share everything. I said, well, I kind of think that's what life after death is like, Tim. We sort of go to the great cosmic library in the sky. We don't lose our sense of self, but we do. And we become part of something broader. So maybe some small aspect of who Paul Kimball is remains, but the knowledge that I accumulate, the experiences that I accumulate, become part of the collective. And I can now experience and share what other people have experienced and shared throughout all of human history, maybe throughout all of non-human history, maybe on the planet Xenon 24, maybe they're part of it too, I don't know. I kind of think if I have to turn my mind to what heaven would be like if there is an afterlife, that's what it would be like. And if I turn my mind to what hell would be like if there is an afterlife, then it would be the absence of any of that. That hell would be sort of a void of all of that knowledge and experience. You wouldn't be allowed to share in that. You would be cast out, still perhaps aware, perhaps still you, so maybe it's still Paul Kimball, but I'd be forced to exist in the void. I might even be able to look. Maybe there's a film called The Rapture. I think it was Mimi Rogers and David Duchovny many years ago, and I quite like it. And Mimi Rogers' character rebels against God in the end because her child had died and other terrible things happen. And then the rapture comes, like the end days, the horns blow and everything. There's a scene where there's this shining city off in the distance. This is clearly heaven. And I believe her husband and her child is there. They're all going to go. And she refuses, I think it's a boat. It's been years since I've seen it, but she refuses to get in the boat and sail over to heaven. She will stay in the void. She rejects God because of the pain and torment that he put her through, even though now all of that is going to be taken away and she'll be reunited with her loved ones and get to share everything. And I thought, that's actually pretty interesting. First of all, the pain and torment that you go through is part of your experience, for good and bad. And if you actually reach the point where I get to get in the boat and go and say, I can share everything, maybe you have to share the pain and torment of all sorts of other people too, throughout all of history. And that could be a very daunting, like all of human history, to give you an awareness of who we are as a species. Like you can go on for hours and hours and hours and hours. I know I have with Greg or whoever talking about these kinds of things. These are the kinds of philosophical, theological, bar stool arguments that after a few beers get really wild. But at the end of the day, I don't know what the answer is. All I know is that my theory, I guess, and I've seen enough now, not through UFOs, although I've certainly talked to people who have seen things, but through my ghost investigating, and I use ghosts in quotation marks. I'd even say my investigation of places where weird things happen, let's put it like that, to convince me that there is something out there that we're dealing with that we don't understand. It understands us, and it's trying to show us things. And so the end result is doing the ghost hunting shows, again, ghosts in quotation marks, I've gone through the range of emotions from scared out of my mind to laughing my head off to, wow, that's just so weird. I'm going to go back to the hotel room and spend the rest of the night not worried about a ghost in my corner, but just thinking about the universe. Like, what the heck are we dealing with here? And that's been a really cool ride. For me, it's probably been the most fun I've had in my entire career. So yeah, that is the longest winded answer I'll ever get to what was a pretty simple question.
No, it actually wasn't too simple, but I think you covered a lot.
Does it impact some of us or does it impact all of us? My answer is it can impact any of us. Here's my last analogy. It's like going to if you want to go see a movie, at least until things changed. If you wanted to go see a movie, you had to buy a ticket and go into the theater. You had to go to a place, buy a ticket. You had to make a conscious effort to want to go see Star Wars or whatever the movie is you're going to go see. I think the paranormal's the same way. You have to buy a ticket. You have to make a conscious effort to say, I want to have this experience. So maybe that means going to a place that's allegedly haunted. Maybe that means sitting out in the desert looking for UFOs, whatever it is. I want to have this experience. If you don't do that, I don't think you're going to have that experience. I think you have to be open to it. I do think you can get glimpses of it, even if you're not looking for it. And I think that's what we call things like synchronicity and deja vu. When those things pop up, I think that's something out there saying you might want to ask whether you want to see more. And if you do, we'll show you. But if you don't, well, we might keep dropping hints, but you might not know what they are.
Now, just one takeaway I have, see if I'm correct on this.
Mm-hmm.
My takeaway from that is your belief is that there is a higher intelligence out there that is communicating with us, or maybe even manipulating us to a certain extent for some type of, if it is art, it's considered a big canvas of our collective experiences on one canvas, on one piece of art. And then I guess when the next generation comes, that's another canvas, and then so on and so on. Do you think that you go on and you come back, and again, do you believe in reincarnation and coming back, or do you think once you're done in this existence, consciousness, you go on to something else, whatever that is?
I'd like to believe in reincarnation. As I used to joke with Mac, I would desperately want to become reincarnated as Jessica Alba. That just, I'd just like to see the other side of the coin, as it were. And then I'd like to come back. I'm just a big Jessica Alba fan. And then I'd like to come back as a snail. Maybe I've already been a snail. I don't know. But, check off the things that I haven't done. There's so many things. Reincarnate me as a leaf. I'll just blow around for a bit. Do I believe in it? No. Do I disbelieve? No. That's my general answer about everything. I'd like to believe in it, though. There's certainly enough philosophers and theologians throughout history that have talked about it, speculated about it, that it's not something that I would dismiss. Indeed, perhaps if you believe in that idea of accumulating knowledge, we're sent out. This is how I would square it with reincarnation. We're sent out repeatedly into different lives to get different experiences. So maybe in a past life, I don't know, I could just pick something bad because I've had a pretty good life. So let's assume I was part of something bad. In a past life, maybe I was a mass murderer. There you go.
Yeah.
I hope not. But the whole gamut of human experience. You lived through the Second World War. You could have been anything from an SS concentration camp guard to a Holocaust survivor to a soldier fighting, for the French army. Anything. Who knows? I don't know. Or you could have been living in a part of the world like maybe Uruguay, where all they really did was read and hear about it. You would have experienced it, all the different possible experiences. If you're one of those things, maybe everybody else was different things. And then you show up in the next life and you get to do different things again. I would like to think that's what reincarnation is. If you talk to people who claim to be reincarnated, especially the celebrity ones, you're always talking to somebody who was either Napoleon or Caesar or Valentino or somebody famous. Yeah, the odds are against that. Even if you wanted to be evil, really the odds are there's only one reincarnated Hitler. So if you're assuming you were evil at that time, there's only one. And then there's everybody else that would have been, under him kind of thing. So most of the experiences that we would have had, maybe somewhere in your life, you get to be, whether good or bad or whatever, important in quotation marks, like a historical figure that would be remembered. Maybe, I don't know. But the rest of the time, you're probably a ditch digger. If I had been reincarnated, I'm sure somewhere in the Middle Ages, I was a plague victim. Maybe I was a plague victim. Like the Monty Python film, The Holy Grail, where the king goes riding by and, well, he doesn't. He clip-clops by. And the peasants are revolting, of course. And they're all in the mud and everything, and they just kind of ignore him. And I think most people that, if you want to talk seriously about reincarnation, you're not going to be talking to people who say, I was Napoleon, or I was Xerxes. It'd be more like, I was Guy. I was in Napoleon's army, and wow, did I take a bullet to the head at Austerlitz. And that was the end of that. And then I came back 20 years later, and all of a sudden, wow, things were all different. Yeah, who knows? But that I would think that's probably how that goes.
Yeah, I think the thing that blows my mind, and you talked about what are the odds that would be here now at this point in time, in all of humanity, in all of time that we're here at this point. And quite frankly, I mean, I agree with you. This has been a pretty good life. I mean, there's a lot of bad vibes going around with the pandemic and civil unrest and all that, but really a lot of us, if we're in the Western Hemisphere, have probably lived a richer life than probably some kings several centuries ago, with all the luxuries and the unfettered supply of food and all the conveniences that we have. So yeah, if this is a life lesson, I wonder if we're near the end of it, because this is a richer time than any time in history, even though there's so much chaos and unrest and people really being unhappy with the way things are. So it's weird. I want to pivot to, you worked on a couple of shows. You mentioned Ghost Cases and I think Haunted more recently. Mm-hmm. And I get the sense that you will accept something, but there's a skeptic side of you. You had a couple interesting experiences. I don't know if it was Ghost Cases or Haunted, but there was one. I'm going to name a couple, and then if you could add a couple in, if you don't mind. There was a really cool video online I saw, the case of the cursed painting, where you went into a place, there was this cursed painting, and you kind of didn't take it seriously, and then at the end of it, you were wondering if maybe you should have. You want to tell us a little bit about that story?
Yeah, sure. That was towards the end of shoot. We only did one season of Ghost Cases. We did the final 4 episodes in the United Kingdom near a town called Congleton, which is up by Manchester. So I have a good friend there, Dave Sadler, other guys, Steve Mara, Paul Reeves. They were part of an organization called the Unknown Phenomenon Investigation Association, or UPIA. So as Bruce Willis would say, he'd probably pronounce it slightly differently, but yippee-ki-yay kind of. I used to call it yippee-ki-yay. It was the UPIA. So anyway, when we went over there and we were staying at an inn, it was the Lion and Swan. I actually don't think it's there anymore. I think they tore it down. But it was an old Tudor inn. There was actually a room that had a Tudor-era bed in it, which was, I was in that room. So I think I slept in Henry VIII's bed. Don't actually think it was Henry VIII's bed, but it was from that era. So yeah, really old place. That's the nice thing about the United Kingdom. If you think there's haunted places in New England or Nova Scotia or North America, wow, there's really every place in England is haunted. But the staff had this kind of legend. And the legend was there was this painting in the basement. And you'd think, whoa, was this a painting of a Tudor king with his hunting hounds and everything? No, this was like a painting from the 1960s of a woman who had one of her breasts exposed. I have no idea why anybody would paint this painting, but it exists. And if you touch the painting, so the legend went, somebody would die. And it wouldn't necessarily be you. It would be somebody you knew or somebody that you were with knew or something like that. But somebody within your little circle of like 6 degrees of separation, which is way too wide, so say 1 or 2 degrees of separation, would die. We all joked about it. I mean, if you see this painting, and you've seen the video, I guess, that I posted, it's absurd. I mean, I don't know who the artist is, so I don't want to demean his or her talent. I mean, it's competently done, but it's just this goofy painting.
It's also not scary. It's not like what you see, like, Annabelle, the doll versus the real doll, right? No. It's just nothing that you would think would have an eerie vibe, at least seeing it in the video. It just seemed like an attractive woman with the breast showing.
Yeah, that's exactly what it was. And so compared to a scary painting, I'd much rather see the attractive woman painting, but there'd be no reason to look at that painting and go, this thing should be haunted. It contains an evil spirit, not the stereotypical reasons. So it's a good life lesson that if you believe objects can contain energy or curses or whatever you want to call it, they don't necessarily look like the Necronomicon. It's like the Indiana Jones movie, right? The Holy Grail didn't look like the Golden Goblets. It was just a simple wooden carpenter's cup. So appearances can be deceiving. Anyway, we get in the basement. Dave Sadler and I are joking around, neither of us really taking it seriously, and that's being polite. And so I touched the painting. And Dave looks at me and he goes, I can't do their accent, but, you shouldn't have done that, Paul. Now somebody's going to die. And if Dave Sadler hears this, that is absolutely not his accent. And I went, woo, spooky, spooky. And then I put it back down and we went on and we did other things. Well, okay, it was the next day. So we finished investigating that night, went to bed, next day, get up, breakfast, we're going somewhere else. Can't remember where, one of our other locations. And what would normally happen was we would go down to the hotel restaurant or dining room, get breakfast. Dave and Steve Mara and Paul Reeves, the 3 guys from UPKA, would join us. Well, they did. 2 of them. Dave was there. Steve Mara was there. Paul Reeves was not. Paul had been with us the first 2 nights. This was our 3rd day. So I said, hey, okay, cool. Hey, Dave. Hey, Steve. Well, that was fun last night. Where are we off to today? Hey, when's Paul getting here? I guess he's coming in separately, right? And they both looked at me and they were pretty ashen-faced for no other reason than the bad news that they had. The bad news was Paul's father had died that night. So I have to say,
Quick question, if you don't mind, Paul.
Yes.
Was it unexpected? I mean, was it something out of the blue?
I can't tell you exactly how, but as I recall, it was unexpected. Now, he might have been ill, I don't know, but it definitely, you weren't expecting, like, tonight's the night. Paul didn't get a call kind of thing. Like, Paul, you need to be on. I had a friend whose father was in a home recently, and he knew his father was about to pass away. So I was there when he got the call. But he knew the call might come that night. And I don't believe that was the case with Paul's father. So it was unexpected. And my mind, and I could tell from the look in their eyes, Dave's mind and Steve's mind, but especially Dave's, because we were the two guys who had goofed around with the painting. Our eyes locked, and it was like, damn it.
Yeah.
Did we? And I'm not laughing. I'm not laughing. Obviously it's terrible that Paul's father died. And did I cause it? No, I don't think so. But did a small part of my mind go, well, the legend is. And so this is either a coincidence, which every skeptic in the world would simply tell you it's a terrible, terrible coincidence. Most of me is sure of that. But I have to admit, as I said in the television show at the end, there was a small part of me that left there thinking, because I had gone in pretty cocky and both skeptical, but also pretty cocky. Like I was, bring it on, pow, pow, me and the ghost kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I left sort of like less so, saying, yeah, maybe there are kind of things. And this was the second last episode we ever filmed because we didn't do a second season. And to some degree, part of it was I didn't really want to do a second season because it wasn't overwhelming, but it's just like towards the end. And this was one of those experiences where I went, I don't know if I really want to keep going down this road. It was a little frightening then. I didn't exactly know how I wanted to deal with it. So the way I dealt with it was by saying, we're not going to do a second season. And we didn't. And then eventually, years later, I sort of went back to it when I said with Haunted, now I'm ready to go back in, be a little less cocky. Although if you've ever seen Haunted, I was still pretty cocky, but not in the way, like if I walked into a house and somebody said, hey, that's a haunted painting or that's a haunted stuffed crow or whatever, you probably shouldn't touch it. Because if you do, somebody's going to die. I guarantee you I wouldn't touch it. Like that's one of those things that I've now learned. So just better safe than sorry. But yeah, that's what happened. Nothing much else happened at the inn, honestly, in that episode. We kind of investigated a few things, but nothing really happened. It was that was the thing that happened. And it's a terrible story for Paul Reeves. And I still feel bad, obviously that his father passed away. But it was an object lesson to me, at least. And if you're going to deal with this kind of stuff, treat it with respect, just in case it's real, even if you don't think it is. And be careful.
That reminds me, Paul, there was I'm hoping to have the guy who owns the Annabelle doll. There was a story where Ed and Lorraine Warren, their son-in-law, actually used to have a show and about, I don't know, the 90s where he would interview them. And now he's kind of the caretaker of the museum, and he's married to their daughter, Judy. And there was a story with the Annabelle doll where this young, cocky kid who came in on a motorcycle with his girlfriend, this doll, because it looks like a Raggedy Ann doll, right?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, this doll's a fake, it's a phony, whatever. Go ahead, mess with it. He insulted the doll, and then going home on the way back, he got into an accident and he died on the motorcycle. So yeah, it's this weird thing that it's never like definitive. It's always like, wow, could that be? It's never like totally definitive, and that's the thing that nags at you. Sorry if I brought up something painful from the past, but I thought that was an incredible story. Hey everybody, this is your paranormal podcast pal, Bob Heskey. Every night I like to listen to videos on YouTube. But lately, with COVID, civil unrest, market volatility, politics, conspiracy theories, I just want to tune out. That's why I like Audible. What's Audible, you say? Audible is the leading provider of spoken word entertainment and audio books, including some great horror and paranormal titles like A Head Full of Ghosts by Paul Tremblay, If It Bleeds by Stephen King, and The Boatman's Daughter by Andy Davidson.
This place is cursed.
Each month, members get 1 credit to pick any title, plus 2 Audible originals from a monthly selection, access to daily news digests if you actually want to hear the news, as well as guided meditation programs. Hey, we all need a little Zen now and again. And Audible is oh so easy. You can download titles and listen offline, anytime, anywhere, on any device. The app is free and can be installed in your smartphone or tablet. You can even listen across devices without losing your spot. How cool is that? If you can't decide what to listen to, no problem. You can keep your credits for up to a year and binge on your favorite series later on. So, here's the rub. The Afraid of Nothing podcast is stoked to partner with the audio bookworms at Audible to offer you a free 30-day trial membership. Just follow the link in the show notes, audibletrial.com/AON podcast.
Puedes repetir eso, por favor.
That's audibletrial.com/AON, all caps, podcast, lowercase. Full disclosure, I get a commission for everyone who signs up using that URL. But you get to try it for 30 days without a commitment. Using our custom URL doesn't cost you a penny and helps out the show if you do sign up. Nothing scary about that. So escape reality and pick up a book, an audio book, and listen to what's out there. Go to audibletrial.com/AON podcast after listening to the show. There's another one, too, which I saw, which I think you just said you went back to, the St. Charlotte County Jail. You mind telling us about that one?
Sure. The old jail, it's in Charlotte County, New Brunswick, up here in Canada, which is right on the Maine border. It's a town called St. Andrews. So you can look across the harbor and, hey, there's Maine. And now you can look across the harbor and wave at Americans and go, hey, you're not allowed in.
So true.
And, to be fair, they wave at us and go, you're not allowed in either, but will you take us? At the moment, the safest place on earth is maritime provinces in Canada. There's no cases in Nova Scotia. There's none, I think, in New Brunswick or PEI. We've bubbled. So we can travel within the 3 provinces, but folks come in here from other parts of Canada. They have to quarantine for 14 days. And you can't come in here from the United States unless you're here on business, like truck drivers and stuff like that. The old jail it's 2 things, a courthouse, and it's right next to the old county jail. And so it's an old stone building from the 19th century. And it was the place where the last recorded hanging, there was one other one in New Brunswick, but certainly in Charlotte County. It was 1942, and they hanged an RAF sergeant, Royal Air Force sergeant, named Tom Hutchings. And what he had done, what he'd been convicted of, was brutally murdering a local girl. After a dance, they had walked out in a little community called Blacks Harbor, where my dad actually, one of the places he grew up, which is about maybe 30 minutes away from St. Andrews. So brutally murdering her, and then he was convicted and he was hanged. And so the legend, the ghost story, which is quite famous, the jail is now an archives and a bit of a museum, and they'll do ghost tours through there. So the story is that the ghost of Tom Hutchings continues to haunt the jail. And you can sit in his cell. What they did, this is really creepy. His cell was at the end. It's not a big jail. It's just like a row of 8 cells. His was at the very end. They built the gallows outside because, they didn't hang people on a regular basis. So they specifically built the gallows for him outside his cell. The remnants of the gallows can still be found in the jail. They propped him up as a bit of an exhibit. And it's right outside where his jail cell is in the hallway. So he would have to be there every day, bang, 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 listening to them hammering away as they built his gallows. And then the short walk to the gallows was pretty quick. And off he went into the great beyond, wherever that is for him. And I think, as I'm trying to remember the story, it took him a long time to die. I think they botched the hanging. So I think it might have taken him more than you're dead, several minutes for him to actually die. So
somebody was good tying a noose knot, apparently. But
sometimes I wonder if the hangman purposefully botched the jobs, but you would lose your job as a hangman if you did that. So that's the story. 11 years ago, when we were doing ghost cases, Holly Stevens and I went there, and we sat in that jail cell. And this was the first investigation we had ever done. And the particular experiences, I remember it as if it was yesterday. So Holly, we sat on his bed, which is just a wooden board now. I was on the left, Holly was on the right. The room was pitch dark. There was not even any illumination coming from the camera because it was a...
One thing to add quick, though, Paul, you had a prop, right? Didn't you bring a prop?
Yes. So, I'll get to Nusi in a sec. So we're sitting there, there's no illumination, and they close the door, and so we're kind of locked in there. And out in the hallway, it's not the noose that hanged Tom Hutchings, but they have a noose that this is what it would have looked like. And so I pulled it, I called it Noosey, and I stuck it around my neck loosely. Like, there was, even if Holly had yanked it, she wasn't going to kill me. It was very loose, but I stuck it around my neck. And it was really cold in there. We filmed that in February. And so it was cold anyway. So we had established what a baseline, because it wasn't heated, what the baseline cold was. Like, here's what cold feels like in here. And we knew it pretty well. So we sit down. Holly's on my right. All she has is an EMF meter, one of those little things, a K2, where it'll spike and go, bloop, the lights will light up if there's some, and you can use them to find faults in your wiring in your house. If you hold it up to your wall and it starts going crazy, you should probably call an electrician, kind of thing. But you can also use it to rule out areas of allegedly haunted places where there might be a lot of EMF, and that might impinge on your ability. You might start seeing things or whatever. So there we are. That's it. And we were just talking. It was weird. It was definitely creepy, but we were very new to this. And then all at once, basically within 1 or 2 seconds of each other, but it happening at the same time. It's what Jacques Vallée would call a high strangeness case, where two people can experience something at the same time in the same place, but experience something that's completely different. I love those cases. They're really weird. Say a UFO case like that. So what Holly experiences is she sees a darker than dark. So the place is dark, but imagine it gets even darker in the form of a figure moving in front of her. I don't see this. She also sees, and I can't see the EMF meter, the K2. It goes bloop, it lights up like a Christmas tree as that happens. So that's what she's experiencing. And I never know whether I'm on a PG show, an R-rated show. So I'll just say she says shoot. That's not what came out of her mouth, but something like that.
Yeah, thank you.
And I thought what she was referring to was what I was, because I said shoot too, or something like it. Because on the camera, you can see my neck. If I'm looking straight ahead, my chin dips down into my chest. And what I experienced was, and the way I've described it over the years, is being strangled by cold, like an icy cold hand wrapping around my throat. Now, that's not 100% accurate, but it's the best way that I can sort of verbalize it. So I experienced that at the same time she sees this. I don't see the shadow person, partly I think because my head is going down. She doesn't experience any extra cold at all. So then we exchange notes. I went, hey, did you get hit with like unearthly, hellish cold around your neck? And she's, no. Did you see the shadow person that walked right in front of us? No. Okay. Oops. So I think we stuck it out for about another 4 minutes. And then we said, let us out, and we said, that's it. We're done. And I think that's more or less how the episode ended. That was our first experience. Sorry, second. We had done one other place before that, and we didn't use it for some reason. I can't remember why. I think there was a technical problem with the footage. So that was our second investigation, the first one where anything really happened. And it was like, blah. So I went up to the folks who run the place, and I said, yeah, you're haunted. Bye. Like, you're definitely haunted. It's not good. My first experience has been a bad one. See you later. And that was it. We were also there investigating the next night. We had to go investigate the Algonquin Inn where we were staying, also in St. Andrews, because it's allegedly very haunted too. There's a particular room there that's supposedly super haunted, and we had weird stuff happen. So it was a very weird trip. And that, it's sort of like Tom Hutchings, this guy, this murderer, then became a running theme a little bit through ghost cases, but certainly when I went back at it in 2017 with Haunted, for 5 years, well, not 5 years, but 5 seasons, 3 years, he was the big bad. Like, I would get hit with cold a lot. Our director of photography, a young guy named Dylan Garland, good friend of mine, was just going to be the guy who shot the show. Eventually, all of our crew members became cast members because stuff started happening to them. And in Dylan's case, the first thing that started happening to him was he stood next to me and he got hit by a blast of unearthly cold. And that became something that happened to him on the regular too. So I developed this theory that, maybe Tom Hutchings never actually left me, that all those years ago, he stuck around. And so this season, this summer, we went back to St. Andrews, and it was like I knew I was leaving the show. I'd made the decision I was leaving. Dylan is leaving the show too. He's staying on as director, but he's leaving as an investigator. So we filmed 2 episodes back to back. There was about a week between them. The first one was at a captain's mansion, an old sea captain's mansion in Yarmouth. We went back to that. We had done that in season 1. And we call it the Demon House because Dylan had some truly frightening experiences. It was where he first really became a true cast member. And he had a demonic presence manifest itself in the room that he was staying in, because we were all staying in the house. It's an Airbnb. So we said, look, Dylan, let's go to these 2 places and we'll put a period on it for us. You confront your thing at the Demon House in Yarmouth, which we did. And at the end of that, he was like, yeah, I think I'm happy with how I've wrapped my journey up. And I said, cool. Now we're going to St. Andrews and I'm going to have it out with Tom Hutchings. And we both filmed one extra location after this. But when we did that, it was like, cool. I remember driving in. We filmed the driving in segment. And I said to Dylan, you know what? We always joke between the 2 of us that we're like Jedi Knights. I'm Obi-Wan. He's Anakin. Good Anakin, not bad Anakin. Or Luke. And we got sucked into this world where we spent 4 seasons fighting the forces of evil. And we had this rogues gallery of demons and bad ghosts and everything or whatever that was trailing along with us. And then he did it at the Demon House. I went back to St. Andrews. I literally had it out with Tom Hutchings. I haven't put that episode together yet, but I'm told from people who are watching the footage that I went on an epic rant where, if Tom Hutchings was following me, he probably never wants to follow me again. But, we had it out. We like a mano-a-mano kind of knockdown fight. And we both felt a lot better after those 2 things. And I said, look, whatever you are, whatever you did, you're staying here. So I drove down to say, I hadn't done this first time. I drove down to Black's Harbor. I visited the gravesite of the young girl that he killed. I then walked the trail. It's a highway, sort of not a highway. It's a rural road. But I walked that up to the point where he killed her. And I walked into the space where her body was found. Hadn't done that 10 or 11 years ago. Because 10 or 11 years ago, what I was doing was very much about the ghost, or whatever you want to call it, the spirit, the demon, the entity, whatever we're dealing with. And so if you assume it's Tom Hutchings, fine. And we never really thought about the victim. This time around, I said, you know what? I'm going back. And I went to Hutchings' grave too. It's not about you. It's about the person you killed. And so I'm going to bring her into the conversation too. I want to go talk to her. I want to go spend some time, if she's still there, with her, let her know how bad I feel about all this, and then tell her, look, they hanged him, but I think he might still be around. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to hang him again, kind of thing. Like, I'm here for you, not for myself this time.
Did you come to that realization, Paul, by yourself, or did you talk to other people that said, hey, wait, you probably need to do some respects for the victim? Did you come up with it yourself, or did you talk to people and they kind of shined a light on that you have an attachment and you have to deal with it at the root of the problem?
No, that was me. I always like to give credit where credit's due, but in this case, I didn't tell anyone else. I asked Holly. She came back as a co-host of Haunted. I asked her that night by Facebook message. I sent her a note at like 5 a.m. after we finished work. I said, hey, Holly, I'm going to go out to, because we did a 3-day investigation. So on day 2, I went out to Black's Harbor. And I said, hey, Holly, I'm going to go to Bernice Connor's grave. And I'm going to walk the route in Black's Harbor. You want to come with me? And she didn't get the message in time because I left at 11. But yeah, it was totally my idea. I just said, you know what? I feel like I got to do this. So I'm going to go do it. And I did. And then I went back that night and I just said, all right, Tom, I've talked to the woman you murdered. I also looked into his case. So I'm an historian by training. I'm a lawyer by training. I only ever practiced for 12 days. I was even, when I was in law school, I even spent 6 months with the RCMP. So technically I was sort of a police officer, special constable. So, I know evidence. I know how to look through court files. I know how to look through that kind of stuff. And I asked the archives, I said, do you have the files from Tom Hutchings' trial? Anything at all. I'll look at anything. Turns out they do. And notes that were taken of the testimony and that, it was the 1940s. So it's not like the kind of stuff you'd find today, but still enough. And I thought, geez, I should have done this 11 years ago too. And what I discovered was that Hutchings, he had a wife back in England, a young wife and a young child. And he had a history of assaulting women. From the very time he got on the boat, he assaulted a woman on the transport over from England, because he was sent over from England to be at an Air Force base here in New Brunswick to train pilots to go back to Europe and fight. So that's the base he was stationed at. It was a base called RAF Penfield, just, 15 minutes outside Black's Harbor. Then he was brought to Halifax. He was involved in an incident here where he was picked up, I think, hitchhiking by a woman, and he assaulted her in the car. So you start to see, because there had been some doubt, we started to wonder, was Hutchings, he never said anything at his trial. by all accounts of the people in the jail, he was a model prisoner. He didn't cause trouble. And the evidence on which he was convicted was circumstantial. Nobody saw him do it, that kind of thing. It was all circumstantial. So I started to say, well, okay, first thing we'll do, let's examine to see whether Tom Hutchings was really guilty. It's a cold case. Let's take a look. And I saw enough in the file about his past to go, which you wouldn't have brought in front of a jury, but I'm not a jury, to go, yeah, no, I think this guy this is a serial killer, as I said to the team. I said, this guy was a serial killer. This woman was his first victim. If he hadn't been caught, he would have done it again because he fits the profile of somebody who moves up the ladder from, say, a casual assault to a serious assault to murder. And there is a progression, usually. And I said, we're dealing with a serial killer here. It's just he only ever killed once, but he would have killed more. So all sympathy for Tom Hutchings, gone. Now we're going to get him. And it became very much, I don't know how many other ghost shows actually get him. I don't watch ghost shows, so I couldn't say. But we definitely did. That was, it was like, our purpose here is to confront him and really let him have it and maybe make his life even worse or his afterlife even worse, because that's what he deserved. And I walked out of there thinking, yeah, I'm done. I've confronted the big bad of my journey. Everybody maybe has their own big bad. And whatever it is, I made it pretty clear, we're done. And you deserve what you got, finito. And then we did this final location, and Dylan and I said, cool, we can be Anakin and Obi-Wan, the Jedi diplomats again. The Clone Wars are over. They've ended well.
That's a documentary, Paul.
Yeah.
It's a documentary.
I know. They've ended well.
Yeah.
This is the alternate Star Wars universe where Anakin doesn't turn to evil and he becomes a noble Jedi master, and Obi-Wan, and they stay friends. And we're just going to go back. And now this final location we went to, the SNL Railway Museum in Lewisburg, Nova Scotia, this is just going to be about whatever the spirits might be here. So it's an old railway station. It could be hundreds or thousands of people maybe there that went through it. It would come back. Who knows what we're dealing with, but we're going to do this. This is more of a diplomatic mission because we've just spent 4 years fighting a war against Tom Hutchings and your demon and whatever other rogues gallery entities we have. And we beat them, or at least we think we're happy with how that ended. So let's have one more location where we do something good. And that was really a cool way to end for both of us our journeys on the show. We're still interested in it. Like I said, Dylan will still be directing. I'll still be editing and writing and producing. But to be actually right there in the field, going into a room or whatever. And no, we both kind of said we've seen enough. We've put a period on our journey so we can let other people, we'll bring new people in and let them see what experiences they have. And I'm just as interested to see, we have new team members, Kim Moser, Jen Taylor, and others, to see what their experiences are going to be. And I suspect they'll be different than mine. I hope so. And then that becomes part of that sort of communal knowledge, right? And then maybe someday in a few years, if the show's, we are renewed for 3 more seasons. So maybe in season 8, I'll go back in 2 years and say, well, now, given your experiences, I have a new path of inquiry that I can take. Something interests me. So now I want to try this again. But at the moment, if I was out of questions to ask, I'd sort of answered them all.
Yeah, I had that question earlier on when you said and also your text to me before that you weren't in front of the camera. So that kind of answers why you kind of went from in front of the camera to behind it. You have a new show you've been working on, Haunted. Is that the one that you're talking about that's been renewed for 3 more seasons?
Yes. So
okay.
We just finished shooting the 5th season, and season 6 we start in November, and then 7 and 8 will be next year. We'll film those next year sometime.
Did you carry on that theme of checking into the victim, like digging a little bit deeper into the history and trying to solve for the victim? Or is that just more specific to the case that you had?
I always like to go into locations, honestly, sort of cold. So I kind of knew the broad story, I guess. But we really did get sucked into sort of a vortex of, I think things were, and other folks, I have an Anglican minister friend of mine who's very interested in ghosts, actually. And he said, I think you take things with you to these locations. So there might be real entities in wherever you're going, but you already have a traveling band coming with you. So it's interesting to see how they interact. The St. Andrews, that was the second last location that we did. The last one was the Railway Museum. So that's the only one that I really had a chance to follow through on. Well, maybe we should look into some of the stories. So I did. We really dug deeper into the stories that people were telling us about what was going on at that location. My mantra to Dylan and the other team members was, this is all about this location. This isn't about what any of us have experienced at other locations. We're going to focus our entire investigation now solely on this one. I said, we're not even going to mention Tom Hutchings' name. I'm not going to mention that. You're not going to talk about this. You're not going to talk, Holly, about this thing that happened 2 years ago. We're just going to do a straight up investigation, because that's what we all get into it for. And then we get sidetracked on this path where, again, we were like the Justice League and we were fighting the Injustice Society. So yeah, it was a different investigation than the ones we had been having for the last 2 years. It was fun. It was good. Stuff still happened.
How would you say you evolved from the cockier guy maybe 10 years ago or whatever to the person who's had this experience the past 4 years? Has it changed you at all in terms of your belief system? Are you convinced yet about ghosts? Are you still receptive? But man, that was interesting.
I'm not convinced about ghosts as we commonly understand them. Are they the spirits of dead people who stick around to haunt us? I think if you're bad, if you're being punished, I can see that you'd be stuck in the place. And part of your punishment would be to spend eternity, or a large portion of it, reliving that experience. Maybe he gets hanged every day. I don't know. But you'd be stuck there. That I find, sure, maybe. If you've lived a good life and you're off, if there is an afterlife and you're off to a better, I don't see why you would stay or why you would want to stay. Eventually, you'd move on. That's the whole idea of heaven. It's this glorious place, or another life. You move on to a new life, whatever it is you move on to. So I never thought like, hey, it's Uncle Ed. And Uncle Ed was pretty cool. And Uncle Ed's been dead for 30 years, but he's still here. I never really caught much to that. I did come to believe that in certain specific cases with people who would have lived lives that were deserving of punishment, this could be part of their punishment. I could see that because usually the experiences I were having were, they weren't with Uncle Ed. They were with darker forces. But then again, that could be that something feeding to me what they think I'm going to expect to find. But I do believe that we were dealing with something that isn't us, and that something that is beyond our understanding, but is still very much a real experience. So I saw enough in 5 seasons of Haunted, 1 season of Ghost Cases, and just life in general to go, yeah, there's something out there. Unlike my grandfather, the minister who would say, I definitively know what it is. It's the God of the Old and New Testament. And, here's the story. I can't say that. But what I can agree with him on, if he was still here, I would say you and I think both agree that there's something beyond us. And, we can probably leave it there and sort of say, you think it's something else and maybe I think it's something else. But we both think that we're dealing with something. There's more than this. Again, the Brian Ferry quote. And yeah, that was the conclusion I came to after that journey. And I look at it now. And when I went into it, I was very skeptical. And hey, it's a gig. I kind of took it because it was a job. Somebody offered me the gig. They basically said, you've done UFOs. Well, you can do ghosts, right? I went, sure. Why not? And then I became much more interested in the ghost thing. I've never really returned to UFOs. I still keep in touch with some of my friends, obviously from the UFO world, and some of them are my best friends. But I don't write about it anymore. I don't make films about it anymore. I know it's out there, and occasionally people ask me about it, and I go, I've spoken at a couple of conferences locally about it. But I'm not a researcher. I don't read new books. Honestly, I don't find it particularly interesting because I've studied the history of it a lot, and everything that's happening in the UFO world has happened before. And when it happened before, it had happened before. So when you hear, the New York Times has articles, there's disclosure is imminent. The military has released these photos, the current thing that's going on. Well, it seems very new if you're 20 years old and you have no knowledge of what's happened before. If you're a little older and a little wiser, and you've studied the history of the UFO phenomenon over the last 75 or 80 years and how we've dealt with it, you will see that there have been things like this before. Congressional investigations, scientific inquiries, whether it was Project Blue Book or the Condon Committee or whatever. And they always come to some sort of conclusion, and then it dies down, and then it comes back in a different format. And our own way of dealing with it reconstitutes itself. So been there, done that, seen it, literally bought the book. Have a friend called Aaron Gullius. He's an historian, teaches in the U.S. He really delves into the past history of it. And he has a pretty good podcast called Something Saucer. And anyway, if you look up Aaron Gullius, you can find it. And if you're interested in UFOs, that's the one podcast I still recommend because it talks about the history. The ghost thing, though, that again, like I said, we all have to deal with life ending, right? and what comes after life. And so that still interests me very much in an existential way. Space aliens are really cool. If space aliens are out there, I want to know about it. I just don't see any movement on that front right now. So,
plus you had a very deeply personal experience. I mean, you've had experiences with someone with you that have had separate experiences, you and another colleague, one with the demon and one in you with the Tom Hutchins character. So it's very personal, the ghost thing versus the UFO, which is interesting, but it hasn't hit you yet. So we're coming near the end. I just wanted to ask you, you are a producer, you make films. What's your favorite documentary that you haven't produced that you'd recommend to our audience? Of all the paranormal shows that you see on the Travel Channel, is there one that you think is really well done that you like?
No.
No,
that's,
okay.
It's not quite true. I will admit I didn't watch any ghost shows, for instance, before I started doing ghost cases years ago. Never seen one. I still don't watch them. Generally, I don't find them interesting. I sort of know how they're made. I kind of think that many of them, we always took great pride. We would never fake anything. The experiences, whether you believe them or not, were real. I earned that reputation in the UFO world too, so I would never risk it in the ghost world. Having said that, I've seen enough of the other ghost shows now they're very American. And again, I don't mean to insult all Americans, but American television is different in many respects from any other television in the world. It's sensationalistic, and I think the ghost shows down there are the same way. Having said all of that, I do have to admit to an enduring, not fondness, not like, but just, it's like watching a train wreck sometimes, Ghost Adventures, like Zach Baggins. I'm not a fan,
yep.
But I do have to admit it fascinates me. And as a producer, I also have to admit it's really well made. Their budget is clearly a lot bigger than ours is, so they can do a lot more things. But it's just a really slick, well-produced show. It's good entertainment. He's an engaging character. That's what I'll say. And I've had a Zach Baggins experience. So it's kind of personal. We were at the Demon House the first time we investigated it, and Dylan and I were up in the attic, and we had a ghost box with us. And as a joke, because I was still a little cocky, just less cocky than I used to be. But as a joke, the ghost box, for your listeners who don't know what it is, it cycles through radio stations and frequencies. And if it spits out a word in answer to something you say, the theory is that it could be a paranormal entity using that energy, those radio frequencies, to give you an answer.
Yep.
That's the very nutshell version. So anyway, we're up there, and as a joke with Dylan and we were talking about Ghost Adventures actually, and I said, "Hey, demon, ghost, whoever's here, anybody out in the ether, I got a question for you. Who do you like better, me or Zach Baggins?" And Baggins, the thing spit out Baggins. And it really, really, really hurt. That stung. But it's the kind of thing where we both looked at each other and we should maybe be scared, or how the heck do you even know Zach Baggins? And then you start to think, are we dealing with something that he's dealt with on Ghost Adventures? Because my knowledge of Ghost Adventures is they don't ever really deal with anything good. So it became a very interesting thing. So yeah, I would say Ghost Adventures is the one that I watch, and it kind of amuses me. And I also respect the technical values of their production. In terms of documentaries, anything by Errol Morris.
Thin Blue Line.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
A Thin Blue Line, yeah.
Yeah, and Dr. Death, the story of Fred Leuchter, who was a Holocaust denier. Morris is, to me, the best. Fog of War, another great film about Robert McNamara.
Yeah.
If you want to know how documentaries should be made, looking at Morris's work is the first place I would send any student. I'd say, watch that guy's work. Because, in fact, I patterned the Stanton Friedman film a lot on Mr. Death, the Leuchter, the Holocaust denier story. Because what he had was, when he interviewed Leuchter, and this was a guy who denied that the gas chambers existed and all that sort of stuff, he had him look directly at the camera. Now, I never went to film school, but the first thing they'll tell you is, when you're shooting, never have them look directly into the camera, right?
Right.
You watch documentaries or news or anything, you'll usually see them looking slightly to the left or slightly to the right. There's many reasons for that. But Morris had Leuchter look directly to the camera. And as Leuchter's story fell apart, it really allowed you to delve into how this guy was creating a narrative for himself that just didn't hold up, and the lengths to which he would go to try and make that work. And you can see that in his face. There's just a certain type of person, when the lies start to unfold, having them look directly at the camera is really cool. I also thought, it's leaving aside the lying part, it's also, if you want to get somebody and make them the center of attention of a film and really focus in on their story, even if they're telling the truth. It's a cool tool. So I used it when I did the Stanton Friedman documentary. When we did the interview with Stan, we did 17 hours of interviews, which my Aunt Marilyn, I don't think, has still ever forgiven me for, in the basement of Stan's house in his office. And for 17 hours over 2 days, we were just looking directly, like the camera was just looking straight down the lens, straight at Stan. And it's a sign of how much a professional Stan was. And that is not a pejorative when I use it. The guy was a pro at communicating, at entertaining. You know, he understood television. He never once wavered. Like he just would talk to the lens, and he got it. And so I've seen lots of documentaries with Stan. I've used him in other ones. I'd never shot him the same way again because they were more traditional. But this was so personal. It was his story being woven in. So everybody else who's interviewed in that film, like Kevin Randall, the late Carl Flock, they're shot in the traditional way. They're at angles and stuff. Stan is always looking directly into the camera. And I still look at that film. I don't know if it's the best film I ever made. I think it is. It's my favorite film, partly because Stan was dear to me, but partly because of the way I shot it. And I think it's the one, he did so many interviews, radio, podcast, television. This is an ego talking. I think it's the one time, because of who he was talking to and how we filmed it, where the real Stan, the Stan that I knew, away from the conferences and away from the 60-second sound bites on Nightline or Bill's podcast or whatever, that Stan came through, from talking about his very early days to his career to even the final question, you know, what do you hope your legacy is? And he sort of says, you know, I hope I made a difference, but I'm not sure, kind of thing. And I thought, yeah, there's an element of a bit of doubt. I think he said, I hope I made the world a better place for my kids, even if just a little bit.
Well, I enjoyed it. And by the way, unless you had a second camera, that's a huge commitment to make, right? Because you're not going to say, okay, Stan, now we're going to have you look off camera for 16 hours, right? So it's like, once you made that commitment, it had to work. And so if it did like that, that's awesome, because that's really a ballsy move to make creatively, and to have it come through like that, there's a lot of satisfaction in that, I would imagine.
Yeah, I was dumb enough, because it was my first film as a director, I was dumb enough not to know better.
Yeah, it worked.
You know, if it had been 2 years later, I might have said, I should probably cover my ass and have a second or third camera. But I just went one camera, boom, straight down the barrel, Stan. And the really interesting thing is, we filmed it on 9/11.
Wow.
So that day when we drove up to Fredericton, I went into my wife's place of work. We have a World Trade Center here in Halifax. It's like 7 stories tall, but we call it the World Trade Center. And she's sitting at a computer looking, as everyone in her office was, looking at the computer, watching the news. It was very early days for that kind of thing. I said, what's going on? She said, a plane just flew into the World Trade Center. And I said, I just drove by the World Trade Center. What are you talking about? And she said, not that one, dummy, the World Trade Center. Yeah. And then the second one hit. And so we were up to Fredericton to film Stan. And there's a scene in the film, which is online. Folks can see it for free. And it's Stan. And we're talking about Stan and conspiracies and everything. It's where the film takes a darker turn into some of the stuff Stan got into. And we filmed it from outside. We went out and stood on his backyard. It was very dark. We filmed him through the window. And Stan is staring very intently at a television. And you're thinking, what is he watching? I know exactly what he was watching. He was watching CNN, because it was the coverage of that night of what had happened that morning. And so Stan, the next day, when we interviewed him, we were all very focused on, we're here to do a job. The world just changed. This is terrible. Stan, you know, you're from that area. You grew up in New Jersey, Linden, New Jersey. We're going to have to delve into that. And yeah, it was difficult, but I think it brought a clarity to all of us that sometimes you just do your best work under trying circumstances. Obviously not trying for us. We weren't in New York, but just the psychic, the emotional shock of all that. Not even knowing if maybe some of your friends had died. You didn't know. So, you know, we sort of soldiered on through that. But Stan was really focused. So again, I think that brought something. It's probably why it's my favorite film, because it's the real Stan, unvarnished, unadulterated, and human. The kind of human Stan you wouldn't see in a 90-minute lecture.
You have to tell us, what is the name of that documentary again, and where can people see it?
The actual name is Stanton T. Friedman is Real. So I think it's Stanton Friedman is Real. The best place to go, though, would be our company website. We've embedded it on the website. And you can find Haunted Season 1 there, and some of my other films, too. So, yeah, right. The website is winterlightproductions.com. So all one word, winter, light, L-I-G-H-T, productions.com. Definitely the Stanton Friedman films there. I think the MJ-12 film, I think Best Evidence, Top 10 UFO Cases is up there. And we do need to refresh it a bit with newer material, but I do think Haunted Season 1 is you can find that there too.
Well, excellent. Well, thank you so much for your time, Paul. I really appreciate it. Hope you still have some great ghost encounters in the future.
Yeah, I wish I had some pithy catchphrase to end with, but I don't. So stay safe is a pretty good one for 2020. All the best to you and yours and everybody down in the U.S., and I hope we're all safe and we can talk about this again next year.
You've been listening to the Afraid of Nothing podcast. Please subscribe and like us on Facebook. Until next time, stay scared.
Hey, you're still here? Great. Then why not listen to another episode? Visit afraidofnothingpodcast.com to peruse all the shows. That's afraidofnothingpodcast.com. And while you're there, click the coffee cup icon to buy me a coffee and leave a review. I'll give you a shout out in an upcoming episode, and the world will know how swell you are.